Hello students, my name is Miss Priya and today we are going to study Standard 12 Business Studies Chapter number 3 Business Environment NCERT textbook. Let us understand the meaning of business environment. It is the sum total of all individuals, institutions and other forces that are outside the control of business enterprise but may affect its performance. Now, generally, I would like to always correlate any business organization to that of a human body. Just as the organs of a human body, or what we can substitute it with the internal environment of a business organization, and the well-being of the internal environment is mandatory for the entire body to function as a whole. At the same time, there are many factors which affect the performance of this business body, what we can call an organization. Now, all these factors, when they are summed together, now some of them may have a direct impact and some may indirectly influence the performance of a business organization. Now, today we are going to study about all these factors and all these forces and also try to understand why it is necessary for us to look into the depth of the entire system, or what we call as the business environment. Let us now study the features of business environment. First, totality of external forces. That means that all those forces which are lying external to the business firms, when they are added up together, or they are summed up, or their aggregate nature is taken into consideration, this becomes the entire course of business environment. Second, specific and general forces. Why specific forces? They include the investors, customers, competitors and suppliers, and these individually affect the enterprise and immediately and have a direct impact. Whereas there are also certain general forces like social, political, legal, technological, etc., which impact all business enterprises at the same time. Third, interrelatedness. There are different elements in a business environment or parts which are interrelated in nature with respect to the business. Dynamic nature. Now, this is something which you would see whenever we talk about anything and absolutely everything which comes with respect to a business firm. That is the dynamism. What it basically means, the environment keeps on changing. For example, the technological improvement can be there. Maybe the consumer preference can change. It can shift from one place to another. Also, there could be new competition. So, all this impacts the performance of a business organization. Uncertainty. Why? Because the environment is constantly changing and it is not humanly possible to predict the future. That is why we always say that the business environment is very uncertain. Complexity, because the business environment, there are many interrelated and dynamic forces. Can you understand that if there is a web, and in that web there are many sub parts and each part individually is changing. So you have to look at the entire totality of the whole web in order to understand the business environment, which is obviously complex in nature. It is difficult to comprehend. It is difficult to comprehend, again I say, but not impossible. And that is why it is imperative that each and every business organization tries to understand its environment. And environment, when we say, it's a complex phenomenon as it is. And it can be easier to understand it in parts and difficult to grasp in a total picture. Relativity, because it differs from country to country and even region to region. To understand any business organization, we need to understand that each firm exists, survives and grows within the range of elements and forces of its environment. And by understanding the environment, the managers can identify, evaluate and react to these forces. So that is why we are going to now study the importance of a business environment. Why is it important for every manager to understand the environment and how to identify the level of impact that these elements will have on the business? First, it enables the firm to identify opportunities and getting first mover advantage. Now, what are opportunities? They are nothing but positive external trends or changes that will help a firm to improve its performance. Now, whenever as a student you would have, try to understand your own performance, you would have been asked to perform a little SWOT analysis. That is your identification of your strength, weakness, opportunities, and threats. So, opportunities are all those external areas which are actually being provided to you, or all those platforms which are trying to push you to perform or enhance your performance. So it is very important for even a business organization to identify these opportunities and then exploit them so that they can have the first mover advantage over these opportunities before the competitors can. Now here I would like to give a very interesting example of if you are talking about the cab services. If you would try to go down a little in the history, you would know that the taxi services were only provided from one point to another, and there used to be a taxi stand. Now the entire concept of having to call upon call a taxi started with Ola and Uber as the top leaders in the market, and slowly eventually you have many more. So this first mover advantage is very important to ensure that your competition level is at a lesser range. Second, it helps the firm to identify threats and early warning signals. Just as you're identifying your opportunities, similarly when you're studying your surroundings, you will also identify the threats which are nothing but all those trends that will hinder the firm's performance, and of course these warning signals will help you to identify your course of action. It helps in tapping useful resources. For any business activity, the enterprise accumulates various resources, maybe in terms of finance, machines, raw materials, etc. And these resources are obviously collected from the environment, let us say through financiers, you have the government or the suppliers. And once these resources are accumulated within the organization, they are converted into some form of a valuable output like goods and services, or maybe payment of taxes, etc., or even return on investment for your shareholders, those who are wanting to invest in your organization. So basically this organization is nothing but a mediator which takes useful resources and processes it and converts it into something more useful or beneficial for the society itself. It helps in coping with rapid changes. The business environment is changing so rapidly at such a fast pace. For example, the market conditions are turbulent. I think this is the best time period where you can understand when we saw a lot of ups and downs in the market when we talk about the year 2020. There is less brand loyalty, divisions and subdivisions of markets are being extended. Of course, the customers are becoming more and more intelligent, they are becoming more and more demanding, and there is a varied amount of changes that are happening in the technological and the global competitive level. So it is very important for any business organization, in order to establish itself or to make a mark in the market, it has to understand and examine the environment, which will help it to cope and to develop suitable courses of action. Helps in assisting planning and policy formulation. By understanding and analyzing the environment, it helps the managers to decide what is the course of action. What is that? Nothing but planning. And also to prepare guidelines so that others can follow these guidelines and also formulate the decision making, which is nothing but the policy formulation. Next, it helps in improving performance. The enterprises which are constantly monitoring their environment, they are able to understand the changes that are happening. They closely are able to understand, and then they can also adopt suitable practices and constantly strive to improve their present performance and overall succeed in the market at a longer time period. Let us now understand the dimensions of business environment. These are nothing but all those subparts of the environment which, if we can analyze either individually or in the total aspect, it will help us to get an in-depth study of the entire environment and also pick up all those points which will help our business firm. Let us begin with the economic environment. Now, there are various economic factors which affect an enterprise. For example, if the interest rates are low, then obviously it is easy for us to borrow funds. If there is high inflation going on, then it affects the cost of business. There is changes in the disposable income of people which will create increasing demand for products. The stock market indices, value of rupee. So all these factors which affect the economy as a whole somewhere will also start affecting the business firm irrespective of whichever industry the firm belongs to. The social environment. There are various social forces which include the customs, the traditions, values, social trends, society's expectations from a business. What are traditions? These are the social practices that have lasted for decades or centuries. And what are values? These are concepts that a society holds in high esteem. That is, freedom of choice in the market, businesses' responsibility towards society, non discriminatory employment practices, all these things. And of course, you have social trends, which are nothing but the opportunities and threats to business enterprises. Now, India being a culturally rich heritage, now it is very important for any business firm to identify and understand these social values and social trends, or what we call as the traditions, or whatever it is, whichever name you would give it to, because the importance of society has been there and the impact of society on any firm has been remarkable. Whichever era you see, you have always seen that the society as such has got a very valued kind of an impact on any business or any kind of commercial activity that has happened over the history of India. Technological environment. These are the forces like the scientific improvement and innovations which will somewhere impact the business organization. For example, there could be new ways of producing goods and services, or maybe newer methods and techniques of operating a business. You would have noticed over the period of history that how slow and steadily the man has been replaced by machine, and this machine does not last for a long period of time, and it becomes obsolete very fast. And it is very important for the business organization to keep in touch with this kind of upgradation that is happening not only at a local level but also at a global level, so that whatever practices they are doing, that means whatever goods and services that they are providing, they would be viable, as well as competitive edge will always be there for these products and services. Political environment basically includes the state, center, and all levels of government and all the institutions and laws that are abiding in that particular region and have a direct or an indirect impact on a business organization. Now, political conditions, which also include the stability and peace of that exists in that particular region, and the elected government, what attitude that particular government has towards that particular sector, whether it is positive or negative, and of course the political stability, which will somewhere increase the confidence of the investors in long term projects. Many times you would have also come across many industries which have been directly promoted by the government. Now, if you see Vibrant Gujarat is something like that, which you all know, that is Make in India concept. Now, these are certain sectors where even Modi government has asked people to come up with small term projects or whatever which are Make in India and which will facilitate indigenous development of the market. So all these factors together constitute the political environment. Legal environment include legislations passed by the government, administrative orders issued, court judgments, and decisions given. Now, these are all those rules and regulations which have to be followed by that particular business organization mandatorily. And of course, it is imperative for a business organization to understand all these laws and the impact that these laws will have on their future performance also. In India, there are various acts, if you would have read even previously, like the Companies Act exists. There is also the Industries Development and Regulations Act, Foreign Exchange Management Act, and various others. Also, the implications of all the legal systems on the import and export policies. So, all these have to be mandatorily taken into consideration before a business enterprise wants to expand or even perform in a particular region. Let us now look into the economic environment in India. Before we study this particular topic further, you need to understand that the economy of a country is a kind of a base. And on top of that base lies the stability of each and every industry, each and every commercial activity, each and every trade, each and every business organization. So the economy is that kind of base which provides a support to all these industries. So first and foremost, let us look into the macro factors which affect business and industry. First, you have the stage of the economic development. Obviously, when you are studying economics also, you would have come across whether it is a developed country, it's a developing country, and where exactly we stand at a global level. Another point is that India has a mixed economy structure where both the public and the private sectors have been given equal platform to perform. Also, the economic policies of the government, which include the industrial, monetary, fiscal policies. Then there is economic planning, that is the 5 year plans, you have the budgets, and so on. There are also certain indices which we have to understand, and this have to be studied closely to identify where or at which level of development that particular industry in which you would want to set up your business organization actually stands. Now there are these indices can be the distribution of income, the GNP, per capita income, and all these factors. Also important are the infrastructural factors like your financial institutions, banks, the transport, communication facilities, and so on, because these are like the tertiary sector which actually provide or facilitate the other parts of the business organization. If we peek into the history and try to understand the economic condition during independence, the economy, of course, majorly belonged to the agricultural and the rural sector, where 70% of the working population was in the field of agriculture. 85% of the population was in the villages, and of course, the technology was irrational and gave low productivity, or the output level was very less. Apart from all these things, India was facing a time period where a lot of communicable diseases were widespread. There was a lot of high, mortality rate was very high, and the health system as such was not good. Now, if you would ask me that why health has got anything to do with the economy, obviously, when we talk about the health structure, it somewhere indirectly talks about the productivity or the output level of the working community. Now, if that itself is not there, so obviously what are we going to produce and what are we going to sell? So this was the state at the time when Britishers had left and we were left high and dry during the independence period. Now again, I would like to tell you at this stage that of course at this particular time in 1951, the Planning Commission was set up to organize a 5 year plan so that they could try to stabilize the industrial sector and bring about some kind of a sense as far as the business setup or the commercial setup of India was concerned. Like I said, at this stage, lot of development plans were framed for the quick development of India. And these included, the objectives of these plans was to initiate rapid economic growth so that the entire standard of living of people could be brought up, and somewhere reduce the unemployment and poverty. They wanted India to become self-reliant and set up a strong industrial base with emphasis on heavy and basic industries. Thirdly, they wanted to reduce the inequalities of income and wealth. That means the rich and the poor, that means those who are coming from the extreme poverty cases, they wanted to bring them up or push them up to some level so that they could also become self-reliant. And finally, adopt a socialist pattern of development which was based on equality and prevent exploitation of man by man, which did exist at the time of pre-independent era. Having got independence after almost 200 plus years of struggle from the Britishers and after formulating their own constitution, the pioneers in the political sector of India basically did not have any other option but to keep the entire control under the government. And that is exactly why they gave a lead role to public sector for developing infrastructural industries. But at the same time, in order to provide quality as well as quantity in the consumer goods which will be consumed by the people or by the normal public, they made the private sector take the responsibility of producing these goods. Also, the government imposed several restrictions, regulations, and control on the working of the private sector enterprise. So, basically, the entire control was directly or indirectly with the government. Having set up the Planning Commission in 1951, our first Prime Minister, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, he thought that he had actually devised a foolproof plan wherein keeping under the public sector the industries and also a tight control of the privatization, he thought that obviously India could emerge as a global power. And he thought that we could slowly and steadily come to a development stage. But it did not so happen. And by 1991, the condition was as follows. There was a crisis with respect to foreign exchange. There was a lot of deficit in the government, and of course there was rise in prices. If you closely look at the picture, you can see the vicious circle of scarcity, control, and low productivity. Just look how scarcity of resources would lead to over control, distribution price, new productive capacity. This further led to delay in the creation of new productive capacity, or it was unremunerative controlled price. This led to chronic imbalance, and there was black marketing, there was corruption, which led to the increase of cost of industries using those resources, which further led to low productivity. There was tax evasion because there was no money, there was hardly any resources that was there. The produced goods were also generated at a very less range, and finally it led to scarcity of resources. So this became a vicious circle wherein the entire government was quickly facing a deficit. With such kind of a economically critical situation, the government then came up with the new economic policy of 1991. The idea or the main goal of this policy was to make the economy more market oriented and expand the role of private and foreign investment. They realized that somewhere the private sector was being taken too much into control, and they had to give up or loosen their entire control over the private sector as well as attract foreign investment, so that the currency or the rupee, which was slowly and steadily falling down, could be brought about to a good range. The broad features of this policy were as follows. First, the government reduced the number of industries under compulsory licensing, that means the ones which required compulsory licensing, to only 6. Second, many of the industries reserved for the public sector under the earlier policies were now de-reserved. That means the role of public sector was limited only to 4 industries, and in all other industries the private sector could now enter. Disinvestment was carried out in case of many public sector and industrial enterprises. Fourth, policy towards foreign capital was liberalized. That means the share of foreign equity participation was increased as much as 100% foreign direct investment, which means that if any particular company wanted to invest in India, any company of course belonging to a foreign country wanted to invest in India, then it was allowed, and not only allowed but also up to the level of 100% in certain cases. Automatic permission was now granted for technology agreements with foreign companies. That means that any company which wanted to bring in newer technology, it could directly deal with any foreign country. So a lot of trade shows actually happened at that particular time, wherein even the foreign companies would come to India and they would want to sell their technology to the Indian market. Also, FIPB, or the Foreign Investment Promotion Board, was set up to promote and channelize foreign investment in India. That means many platforms were provided so that now the communication between the foreign countries and India was eased out. This policy also facilitated what we call as the LPG model in the growth of the Indian economy, that is liberalization, privatization and globalization. Liberalization included removing unnecessary controls and restrictions, abolishing licensing requirement in most of the industries, no restriction on expansion or contraction of business. That means you can expand either physically or the scale or the level of operations that you are having. The restrictions on movement of goods and services was removed. There was also reduction in tax rate. All this was to attract foreign capital and technology. In order to reduce the government involvement in all the commercially viable activities, the government now started with privatization. Under this, firstly, there was disinvestment of the public sector, which means that there was dilution of the stake or the control of government in the public enterprise, and it was now allowed to be taken over by the private sector. Also, BIFR or the Board of Industrial and Financial Reconstruction was set up to understand and analyze all the loss making and the sick units and try to pull them up and make them commercially viable projects. Of course, this was done either by providing them financial or managerial or administrative aid, and whatever prerequisites were there in order for them to stabilize and then support them in a way so that they can become profitable ventures. Globalization, which means integration of various economies of the world. That means now the global platform became easier to reach out to. Lot of restrictions and regulations were reformed with respect to licensing of imports, tariff restrictions, quantitative restrictions, the amount of goods that you could deal with, what the number of goods that could be brought inside the country. So lot of restrictions which were previously imposed so that the government could actually have control were now slowly loosened so that there could be free movement of goods and services. There was also growth of trade with respect to imports, exports and foreign exchange. Now it is a very simple logic that if you are allowing foreign traders to come into India as well as allowing Indian traders to go into foreign countries, what is basically happening is the exchange in terms of foreign currency. Now this foreign currency was very important for the country so that it could increase the value of the rupee. That means more and more money could be brought inside the country. Also, there was increase in interaction and interdependence among nations. That means a lot of talks. Of course, I don't have to tell you about our own Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi, who has been going about talking, and he has been trying to bring up trade relationships. He is wanting to build relationships with many countries. The reason being that globalization would allow and facilitate the improvement in the economies of all the world. Let us now look into the impact of the LPG model on the business and industry in India. First, increasing competition. The moment you allow private sector to enter into the market, that means you're allowing competitive goods and services being produced. That means somewhere the consumer has now become smarter and now he wants to receive more value with lesser price. So this led to a lot of increase in competition among various companies. Second, more demanding customers. Of course, the customers now became more informed. They knew what they wanted. Like I already mentioned, they wanted a little value addition for the money that they had given for any particular goods and services. And this is there and this still continues to be there. And that is where the development of the goods and services was becoming more and more competitive. Third, a rapidly changing technological environment. Since companies were allowed to bring in or import the technology from foreign countries, so as and when the technology started getting upgraded, the whatever was becoming obsolete in the country was quickly being replaced by the upgraded technology. Now, although for the bigger companies this was not a particular problem, but the smaller firms which could not keep on changing their technology as fast as it was actually changing at a global level, it became a problem. Fourth, necessity for change. Now the time became very turbulent because more and more people started entering the commercial sector. So now people wanted to quickly change and stabilize before they have competition from other enterprises. need for developing human resource. The Indian enterprise, now having suffered a long time period with untrained or inadequately trained professionals, now they wanted to get competitive edge again by bringing in those people who have a more commitment towards their work, or they are able to perform, or the performance level was becoming higher and more well trained. Market orientation from a production oriented market, that means first the goods are being produced and then sold, it became market oriented, that means to produce those goods which the market demanded. Loss of budgetary support to the public sector. So far, the public sector was being spoon fed by the government. But with the LPG model, they realized, and once the private sector came in and the competition increased, the consumers are changing, everybody is changing, the technology is developing fast. Now, even the public sector knew that if they wanted to survive, they have to actually perform and they have to reform their ways and means of producing goods, and also their market style and market orientation had to improve, or they had to be at par with the private sector. Demonetization. It means the process of removing a currency unit of its status as a legal tender. Usually, a new currency replaces the old currency unit. You are all aware of the demonetization that happened on November 8, 2016, when the two largest denomination notes, that is of rupees 500 and rupees 1000, were demonetized with immediate effect. That means they were ceased to become legal tender except for few specified purposes. You all would also remember the helter-skelter, the chaos that happened during that time period, where everybody was going to the bank to deposit all these demonetized currency in exchange for the currencies which were still under the legal tender. So what is the aim or the objective of having demonetization? It was to stop financing terrorists, to pull out the black money and expand the fiscal space of the government, to reduce interest rates in the banking system, and also help formalize India's informal economy, that is, reduce the extent of cash transactions and help in creation of a cashless economy. Let us quickly look at the benefits of demonetization. It increased the savings, lower lending rates, because obviously the people started depositing their money in the banks. That means that now the bank had more currency to give away loans, which would overall reduce the lending rates. Better economy and curbing anti-social activities, and of course reducing counterfeit currency units. So it was becoming more and more important even for the government because of the number of counterfeit currency that was roaming in the market. Now if there was a fake 500 rupee note or a fake 1000 rupee note which was not viable any which way, so obviously if they were being deposited, they would be held at the counter itself and it would be removed from the system. At the same time, you would have noted certain limitations of demonetization when it had occurred recently in the year 2018. First, it creates chaos among common people due to inadequate supply of new notes. And small businesses suffer financial losses, because if you understand, many of these small businesses actually they do have their income based on cash. The transactions are mostly based on cash. They deal with cash on a regular basis. So if that became curtailed, then it became very difficult for them to conduct their businesses. Second, printing out new currency notes involves a huge amount of cost even for the government. And the people who rotated black money in purchasing assets like real estate, gold, were not affected by demonetization. There were people who started investing. Even now, if you would faintly try to remember, what happened was many people started flocking towards purchasing of these assets where they knew the value would dip but never fall over a long period of time. Now gold is something like that. It's an asset which it might dip for a temporary period of time, but over the longer period of time you would know that gold would always retain its market value. So these are certain limitations of demonetization.